Thanks very much for staying with us here on Press TV as we continue to take a closer look at the continuing fallout from President Donald Trump, the President of the United States' decision to declare the Jerusalem Al-Quds city as the capital of Israel, as well as, of course, his intention to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem Al-Quds. Let's, in fact, listen to a soundbite of that announcement he made.
Today, we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done. That is why, consistent with the Jerusalem Embassy Act, I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. This will immediately begin the process.
Okay, that was President Donald Trump. Part of his announcement there, you just heard about this decision that he has made tonight, a decision which, of course, was expected and we had been speaking about for a number of days here at Press TV as well. Let's bring in a number of analysts to discuss this a bit further. We're joined by Tony Gosling, who's an investigative journalist, and he's joining us live from London. And we're also joined by Shabir Hassan Ali, who is an activist and Islamic scholar, and he is also joining us live from London. Thank you both for joining us. Shabir, I'll start with you. You know, one of the things that I think is important to speak about this narrative, Shabir, is that this issue of Jerusalem Al-Quds and Israel-Palestine is always constructed and spoken about within the confines of a religious war or religions at war with each other. Do you agree with that as an Islamic scholar? Is this issue of Jerusalem Al-Quds something that is Islam versus Judaism, for example?
No, the entire issue of not just Jerusalem, but the whole issue of Palestine has very little to do with religion per se. The only thing to do with religion is that people within that area follow a religion, be it Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. Rather, the issue of Palestine and Jerusalem is an issue of justice. It's an issue of the world recognizing and accepting and condoning theft. Because what happened in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, followed by the establishment and acceptance by the so-called United Nations of the Zionist entity, and using the slogan, the Zionists were using the slogan that Palestine is a country without people, for a people without a country, without a land. This is a lie, a flagrant lie that people like the BBC and various other media mouthpieces from that time were promoting to try and let the world know or make the world believe that this was just some random piece of desert and that these poor oppressed Jewish people needed to come over there. Interestingly, there are Jews who have been living in Palestine long before the establishment of the State of Israel. And it's also interesting when you think and look at, especially when you go back to the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s, the way that the Falasha Jews from Ethiopia, when they came to so-called Israel, they were treated like slaves. They were treated like peasants. They were treated with horribly, terribly, and many of them actually went back or left Israel for whatever reason. So Israel has got nothing to do with religion. The whole issue has nothing to do with religion. It's framed within the religious confines by some people because they want to create this sectarian hatred. Whereas the reality is Bethlehem, which is a city which is very special to Christians, to Muslims, is a city which is occupied. It's a city where people are getting killed and treated like garbage every day by the occupiers, the Zionist occupiers. And this is also important. Zionism has nothing to do with Judaism. Judaism is a divine faith. It's honorable. It's dignified. It uses justice. It follows the rules of justice and truth. Zionism is a fascist, racist, apartheid ideology created by atheists who think that somehow God is a real estate agent who gave them this land. God is not a real estate agent. God doesn't give land to people. Land is with the people. Everyone can come and live in a land, but they need to live with justice and with dignity and with fairness. The Zionists have come along and stolen this land. The British allowed it and, in fact, helped them. And now you have America revealing the mask, moving the mask away from its face, is like, America was saying, oh, we believe in this Middle East peace and all this garbage.
Right.
Trump has just removed the mask and said, no, actually, we're just stooges of the Zionist project, and we're just gonna, do what Zionism wants. Because I mean, let's be honest. Zionism not only occupies Palestine, it occupies Arabia, it occupies the Persian Gulf region, it occupies Britain, it occupies America, and most of the world.
Right.
This is the reality that we need to understand. It's got nothing to do with religion, even though people try and frame it that way because they want people of differing
Okay,
faiths
Shabir,
to
let me
fight
just
each other.
take that point that you just made, and I appreciate putting that in context for us. And I want to put that point to Tony then, because Tony, one of the discussions that happens amongst the right wing within the United States, and I've seen this many times, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, is that Christians are being persecuted in the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder though, why isn't there talk about the Palestinian Christians, for example? And we've had the Archbishop of one of the major churches in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, come out and in fact speak out against this decision of Donald Trump. So that's a Christian leader speaking out against this decision. Why isn't that being highlighted and spoken about?
Well, good question, and I would totally agree that there's been an attempt to frame the conflict going on in Israel-Palestine as a religious war. Actually, it's really about real estate. But I totally disagree about the British aiding what we're seeing today. The British actually resisted the recognition of the Israeli state, and also there were hundreds of deaths of British soldiers, British armed forces, and of the people who were staff working with the British in the Palestine Mandate back in the 1940s. The British were bombed out, actually, of Israel and Palestine. And I can tell you, I've spoken to members of the armed forces here in Britain, mostly obviously retired now, who served over there, people who were, for example, working in the police over in Palestine in the 1940s, that still bear grudges against the Zionists for the way they treated. Obviously, the most well-known is the bombing of the British headquarters, a massive explosion at the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. So, I think I have to disagree very strongly. The British didn't actually facilitate this other than through the Balfour Declaration, and they wanted to make sure that there was a very equitable state. In other words, that Arabs and Jews had an equal share. In fact, as part of that agreement, there was wasn't there, the division of Jerusalem into East and West Jerusalem, which lasted all the way from the 1940s right up until the Six-Day War in exactly 50 years ago, wasn't it? 1967, where Moshe Dayan and his tanks and his guns smashed their way through into East Jerusalem and occupied it, kicking out the Egyptian troops, kicking out the Jordanian troops, kicking out the Syrian troops, and that was the beginning of this massive sore we now see today, which is the occupied territory, the occupied West Bank, all these other areas which should be controlled by the Palestinians, but where the Israeli troops are wandering around willy-nilly. So I think we've got to be really clear about, I don't think that the Jewish people are going away. Let's just be clear about that. They're staying. But what we need to see is we need to see a state without somebody like Netanyahu, who, let's face it, is a fundamentalist fanatic. And we need to see some kind of state which shows an equitable treatment of human beings, as actually almost everybody who's serious about Judaism and the Jewish religion agrees with this. We need to respect our neighbours. We need to respect differences in others. But the Zionism is a fanatical form of this, and I think that's where the criticism lies. We've seen similar sorts of things going on here in Britain, actually, in Northern Ireland. A sectarian conflict which was cooked up by people. They tried to pretend that it was Catholic versus Protestant. Actually, it was about fanatical sides on both sides. That is to say, the Republicans fighting the loyalists who were on the Protestant side, the gunmen. And some of the biggest atrocities actually were done by the loyalists in Northern Ireland. Now, thank God, we have peace. And let's hope that over in Israel-Palestine, some of the lessons can be learned that were learnt in Northern Ireland to actually bring people together. And we do need to out people like Netanyahu for persuading Trump through the Israel lobby and through the money exchanges that go on, through the very powerful lobby that there is in Congress, to stop this road to Armageddon. Because there is actually, it's not just Trump, it's not the first person to talk about this. There was a British vicar from the Church of England, the Reverend Stephen Sizer, wrote a book back in 2006 called The Roadmap to Armageddon. And on it, he gives 6 stages which will lead to a Middle Eastern war, which many people are now pointing to as a potential third world war. He says for the first one is that the Jews must remain God's chosen people. This is the Zionist ideology. I'm telling you here, I don't think this. Nobody in their right mind thinks this, but the Jews are God's only chosen people. Then he says that they will be restored to what they call the scriptural lands. This is borrowing bits of the Old Testament and quoting them. Then he says that Palestine must be exclusively Jewish. And that is also the next stage, and it's becoming that, of course, as we're seeing the ghettoization of the Palestinians in places like the West Bank and Gaza. Then he says that, and this is where Donald Trump comes in, that Jerusalem will be made the capital. Now, of course, we haven't heard very much from Antonio Guterres today, the Secretary General of the United Nations, about what the UN says about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is half Arab and half Jewish.
Right.
That's the way it stays. The West is Jewish controlled, and that's what the United Nations laid down in law. Okay. So that then we got 2 more stages. I'll quickly run through them. Then what we see is that there will be an attempt to build the 3rd temple on the Temple Mount by the Israeli state. That's what they're planning to do. That, of course, means potentially anyway the demolition of the Dome of the Rock, the demolition of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This, of course, is a provocation, a massive provocation. And then finally, the Christian Zionists and the Jewish Zionists, what they want to see is a war with Islam in the Middle East. And that's why they don't really talk seriously when they talk about peace. Because actually they believe that God wants them to have a war.
Right.
This is
okay,
how
so Tony, let me just come in here because I do want to bring Shabir back into this conversation. Shabir, you just heard, and we do know Stephen Sizer well here at Press TV 2. We've spoken to him a number of times, and we do know of that book very well. And those 6 points that Tony just mentioned, what do you think about those points? And of course, specifically, of course, about what's happened today. Jerusalem, Al-Quds has been, by the United States President, declared as the capital of Israel.
I'll come to that in 1 second, if I may. I will agree to a degree with what my colleague said about the fact that the British bore a lot of pain in the 1940s, pain that was delivered to them by the Zionist gangs like Irgun, the Stern Gang, and other people like that. But I still hold the British government responsible, and not just the British government, but most of the governments of the world, mainly because they've pandered to Zionism. There's been no sanctions, there's been no punitive measures against the atrocities that the Zionists have been committing, be it in this century, in the 20th century, the 21st century rather, with the Gaza bombings, with the campaign in Lebanon in 2006. There was nothing. There was a deafening silence by the British government. And in fact, in Gaza, when the tragedy was happening and Israel was carpet bombing Gaza, the British government and its mouthpiece, propaganda mouthpiece, BBC, actively misinformed the public and prevented the truth from coming out and prevented aid from being gathered. So yes, I understand that British soldiers were harmed by the Zionists, but at the end of the day, first of all, Britain had no right in 1917 to make a Balfour Declaration. Whether it's going to be fair and all of this stuff, no. Britain has only got the right to give away parts of Britain. And that part of the world is not. Britain can give away, if it really cares about the Jewish people so much, okay, fine, give away, I don't know, a part of London, give away Golders Green or Watford or, whatever. There's no need to give away Palestine, which is not British property. Now, coming back to what you were saying, Waqar, about this plan, I mean, we can see that regardless of whether a book has been written or a particular pathway has been mapped, if you like, towards Armageddon, as per this book, we can see that this is what they're going for. We know that the Zionists, the extremist Zionists, have been planning and working, and they have the full plans, they have budget, from what I've read, to build this 3rd so-called temple. And they want to demolish Al-Aqsa. And the reason why they are getting more emboldened, the reason why they are able to carry on and do this, to get Trump to declare Jerusalem as the so-called capital of so-called Israel, the reason why they're able to do this is because the world lets them get away with it. When the Israelis were bombing children in Gaza on the beach, This was all over the Western newspapers, but the world did nothing. The world was silent. It was almost like the world was catatonic. It didn't make any scream. It didn't shout out. And I'm not, when I say the world, I don't just mean the Western world. I mean, even in the Arab world, while on the streets there was something, but all of these compromised Arab Zionists that occupied the Arab capitals like Riyadh, like the Abu Dhabi in the Emirates, like Manama in Bahrain, and all of these, they said nothing. They allowed it to happen. They allowed it to happen. Now, when you have a bully in an area and you allow that bully to constantly get away with it, the bully is just emboldened and it gets more and more psychotic in its action. And this is what's happening. What is happening today, what has happened today with Trump, who is a complete imbecile, there is no other word for this man. What has happened with Trump declaring Jerusalem, in inverted commas, the obvious capital of so-called Israel, is something which, when you allow the Zionists to take over your country, which is what's happened in America, not now, it's been happening for a long time. It's happened over here in England. It's happened everywhere. When you allow this to happen, you reap what you sow. If you allow a bully to get away with things, that bully will come and destroy you. This particular action that Trump has done, it's a very dangerous action, because if anything happens, I'm praying that the Muslims and the free people of the world, the people with intelligence who care about humanity, not just Muslim, but Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, as long as they care about honesty, they care about decency, they care about justice and truth, all of these people should stand up. The countries of the world should impose immediate sanctions on America. They should stop trading with America in as far as is possible. And especially, and if they're trading with Israel, they should cut all ties. Turkey talks the talk, but really, Mr. Erdogan, if you're serious, cut ties immediately with the Zionist entity. Break it. Cut ties. Don't. Okay,
Shabir, I'm going to interrupt you. I do apologize, just because we only have 2 minutes left. I do apologize. I just wanted to get both of your final comments very quickly before we let you go. Tony, I wanted to ask you then, considering, as Shabir pointed out, reactions to this, do you think that it'll just be limited again to condemnations, as we've seen in the past, condemnations by the OIC, the Arab League, and other such organizations, but no real action?
Well, the thing is, what action can they take? I mean, there certainly could be boycott of the Israelis. I just want to say, I think we need to explain that there's been a wave of reaction against this around the world. Trump is utterly isolated in what he's doing. And I think, we have to see him as a man who's being hemmed in. Remember, he's under threats of impeachment, this sort of thing. So he's really a puppet president now. He's becoming somebody who is unable to really do what he wants. So obviously, there's all this Russiagate going on, etc. We've had the Pope speaking out against this. We've had the Secretary General of the UN speaking out about it, the EU criticising Trump, saying this is not on. I mean, it depends how brazen the Israeli government and Netanyahu are prepared to be in the face of world opinion. Even people you might expect have been approving and patting Netanyahu on the back are saying, no, this is a step too far.
Okay,
I think if we ever really
let me just get Shabir's final comments, Tony. I do apologize.
We've got to stick to the half and half Jerusalem,
right,
with the Arab half being restored in the east.
Okay, Shabir, go ahead with your comments on that same question as well. Will we be limited essentially to condemnations on the part of the world?
I really hope not, but also we have to understand the only reason that Trump did this, especially after lots of consultation with the Gulf states, especially the Arab Zionists in Riyadh, so-called Saudi Arabia, because we all know that Saudi Arabia spoke to Mr. Mahmoud Abbas and told him that, look, Trump is going to give you a peace plan, you need to accept it, you have 2 months, this, that, and the other. You're not going to have Jerusalem, you're going to have a village called Abu Dis as your capital. Now, the thing is, the people need to stand up to their governments. The people in occupied Arabia need to stand up against this cancerous entity of the family of Saud and literally tear them apart, destroy them. Because if the Muslim world, if the Arab world gets together and cuts the fuel, then this whole campaign of so-called, Israel will be finished. The Arabs have got the ability to break the back of this, but if they have the will, this is the difference. I don't know if they have the will. I pray and hope they do. But they need to understand the only thing the Zionists understand is resistance. The only time they've had to give land back is when Lebanon and Hezbollah did resistance against them, and they went back.
Shabir, I'm going to stop you there. I do apologize, but of course we do appreciate both of you taking your time out to speak to us here at Press TV and sharing your thoughts and analysis with us. That was Shabir Hassan Ali, activist and Islamic scholar, who had been speaking to us live via Skype from London, and we were also joined by Tony Gosling, investigative journalist, who had been speaking to us live via Skype from Bristol. And of course, we are continuing to take a closer look at the fallout from President Donald Trump's decision to declare Jerusalem Al-Quds as the capital of Israel, and of course his decision as well to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem Al-Quds. We'll of course continue to cover this very important story in the coming minutes.